You can conquer the entire world and still live like a prisoner. No matter how hard you try to run, something inside you keeps pulling you back to the same place. The strangest part is, you don't even know exactly what it is. But Carl Jung discovered something that can change everything. He said, "You will never be truly free until you face what is hidden inside you." What he found in the depths of the human psyche is so powerful, it can break the invisible chains that have kept you stuck for years. In this video, you will understand why your shadow controls your decisions without you realizing it, and how facing it can awaken a force that has been asleep since your childhood. This is not self-help. This is the beginning of a real psychological transformation. It is something you have always felt, but never knew how to explain. Once you discover what is behind it, nothing will ever be the same. If any part of you feels trapped by something you cannot explain, this video was made for you. So subscribe to the channel right now, because here we talk about what no one else dares to face. Hit the like button, because that simple gesture helps this message reach those who need to hear it the most. And watch until the end, because there, I will reveal the key that can unlock the most powerful part of your mind. This is not an exaggeration. It is an invitation to wake up from a deep sleep you did not even know you were in. Bryan was always seen as someone strong, cold, and rational. The kind of person everyone turned to when chaos took over. He had answers for everything, except for what happened when he was alone. At night, when the lights went out and silence filled the room, he felt something. A weight, as if there was a presence inside him. Something without form, but that seemed to watch him, to judge him. And the worst part, it felt like it knew him better than he knew himself. For years, Bryan pretended it did not exist. He filled his time with work, the gym, and social media. But whenever the distractions stopped, it came back. A strange discomfort, an anxiety that made no sense. Until one day, after a painful argument with someone he loved, he collapsed. Not physically, psychologically. A kind of breakdown that cannot be explained in words. It was as if his mind had crumbled from the inside. That was when he first heard about the concept of the shadow. Not from a cheap self-help book, but in a lecture that mentioned Carl Jung, the psychologist who had the courage to look into the darkest corners of the human mind. Bryan discovered that what he had been feeling was not madness. It was a calling, a cry for help from within. And then came the shock. Everything he had tried to ignore, repress, or hide was there, waiting, watching, shaping his reactions, his choices, his failures. He understood that unless he looked directly at it, he would keep living a half-life, an automatic existence, without soul. This is the part almost no one understands. What you avoid inside yourself is actually the source of your power. But as long as you run from it, that power turns against you. The shadow does not disappear. It only shows up in ways you cannot recognize. And when you least expect it, it takes over everything. After that night, Bryan started to notice patterns he had never seen before. Every time he felt rejected, an irrational anger rose inside him. But it was not just anger. It was fear in disguise. A deep fear, buried so long ago that he had forgotten it. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being abandoned. And worse, the fear of looking into himself and not liking what he found. In everyday situations, it was as if the shadow came alive. A co-worker's look triggered thoughts of inadequacy. A simple criticism turned into internal humiliation. Bryan was beginning to understand that the reality he saw outside was actually a distorted reflection of what he refused to see inside. This is where things started to escalate. The more awareness he gained, the more he saw that the shadow was not just made of trauma. It was made of unlived potential, of talents he had buried to fit in, of desires he denied in order to be accepted, of truths he swallowed so he would not disappoint anyone. He began having strange dreams, symbolic dreams, as if something inside him was trying to speak. A dark room, a shattered mirror, a hooded figure watching him in silence. It was as if the unconscious was pushing to the surface what needed to be seen. The more he resisted, the more intense it became. He realized this process was inevitable. Either he faced it, or he would be consumed. Then a question began to grow inside him. What if all this chaos was not a mistake? What if it was happening for a reason? What if the pain was only the beginning of a deep transformation? The answer would come later. But in that moment, something shifted inside Bryan. For the first time, he did not run. He sat in silence. He took a deep breath and began to listen. What he did not know yet was that this act of facing the shadow was only the first step, because what would come next would test everything he believed about himself. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This sentence seems simple, but it carries an ancient code, a code that ancient civilizations already knew, long before modern psychology existed. In ancient Greece, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi had an inscription at the entrance. Know thyself. It was not advice. It was a warning, a dangerous calling, because knowing yourself is not about discovering talents. It is about unearthing truths you spent your whole life trying to hide. Jung called the shadow everything you repress, personality traits you consider unacceptable, impulses you try to suppress, emotions you learn to judge as wrong. But what most people don't understand is that this shadow does not disappear. It is stored, it grows, and at some point, it finds a way to manifest. And it's not just psychologists who talk about this. In Tibetan tradition, there is the concept of the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth. But the masters teach that this bardo can also happen in life, when we are forced to confront parts of ourselves that were forgotten. It is like crossing a psychic desert, where there are no masks or excuses, only you, naked, fragile, and true. In Kabbalah, there is talk about the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to evil, which in truth is not evil in essence, but raw energy, a force that, if integrated, transforms into spiritual power. If denied, it becomes self-sabotage, guilt, repetition of destructive patterns. The same principle is present in alchemy, which deeply influenced Jung. The alchemical process was not just about turning lead into gold, it was about transforming the raw soul into pure essence. And the first step was always to dive into the nigredo, the darkness, the chaos, the inner collapse. Bryan, without knowing it, was going through this exact process, but now with a new perspective. He began studying the accounts of Jung's patients, people who also felt the call of the shadow, and instead of running, decided to listen. And what these people discovered was surprising, because on the other side of the pain, there was a clarity they had never experienced before, an authenticity that did not depend on anyone's approval, a power that came from within, silent but unshakable. What ancient traditions, mystics, and the deepest psychologists have always tried to say is that pain is not the end, it is the signal, a warning that you are ready to cross the portal. But this portal is not outside, it is inside, hidden in the part you fear the most, and the more you resist entering, the more it grows. There are secrets that only reveal themselves to those who have the courage to look within. And that courage is not the absence of fear, it is exactly the opposite. It is being afraid and continuing anyway, because in the end, everything you most desire to be is hidden exactly where you least want to look. There is a question that almost no one has the courage to ask. What if your pain is actually a map, a hidden code pointing to the most powerful part of your identity? Bryan began to suspect this when he realized that the same emotional triggers that knocked him down also showed exactly where he needed to look. It was as if the shadow left clues, small cracks where the truth tried to escape. But not everything was clear. He still did not understand why certain patterns kept repeating, why, even after so much awareness, he still sabotaged himself at the most important moments. There was something still hidden, something deeper, a primitive, emotional core, almost inaccessible. And this is exactly where most people stop, because it is at this layer that the mind begins to create illusions. Relationships that seem perfect and suddenly fall apart. Success that arrives but never lasts. The constant feeling of being on the edge of some great change, but it never comes. This is not bad luck. It is not fate. It is the shadow operating in the background. And there is a reason why it does this. A reason that few ever discover. Because when you get too close to this truth, the unconscious reacts. It starts to protect you from the revelation itself. But what is being protected, after all? And why? There is an answer to this. An answer Jung never wrote directly, but left scattered in symbols, myths, and archetypes. And once it is finally understood, it changes everything. When Bryan finally had the courage to cross that inner threshold, something curious happened. It wasn't an explosion, nor a magical moment of enlightenment. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. He just started to notice that he was reacting differently. What used to make him explode now only provoked silence, a space between the impulse and the response. And within that space, there was freedom. Little by little, he began to recover parts of himself he had lost. The creativity he thought had died in childhood, the intuition that had always been there but was drowned out by logic, the courage to say no, to take a stand, to stop living according to other people's expectations. Bryan didn't become someone else. He reconnected with who he had always been before the shadow took control. The most powerful benefit of this process is not becoming invulnerable. It is becoming whole. Because when you integrate your shadow, you stop being a hostage to impulsive reactions, to toxic relationships, to repetitive emotional cycles. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. And that is true strength, the strength that comes from deep self-knowledge, not from the ego, but from the soul. And here is something no one tells you. Your shadow hides exactly what you came to offer the world. That's why it's so frightening, because it carries intensity, truth, impact, but only when you face that darkness head-on can you access that gift. Bryan realized that his greatest fear, being seen as weak, vulnerable, imperfect, was exactly what made him human. And it was when he stopped running from it that others truly began to see him. And now I ask you, how many aspects of yourself are you still denying? How many times do you stay silent just to maintain the image of someone who no longer represents who you are? The shadow you're hiding today might be exactly the key you need to change everything. Bryan thought he had reached the end of the process, but what he discovered is that integrating the shadow is not a destination. It is a cycle. With each new level of awareness, a new layer of shadow reveals itself. Because the unconscious is vast, it communicates through dreams, symbols, repetitions. And the more you grow, the more it demands truth, depth, alignment. In one of his last therapy sessions, Bryan shared a strange dream. He was walking down a dark hallway where many doors were locked, but at the end of the hallway there was one door slightly open. Behind it, a child was watching him, calm, silent, and the moment he looked into her eyes, everything went dark. What did that child represent? Why was she there? And why did she seem so familiar? These are questions not everyone is ready to answer, but if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you has already started to awaken. Maybe you're about to face your own half-open door. And when you do, you'll understand that what you fear the most is exactly what came to set you free. If this message spoke to you on any level, don't ignore the calling, subscribe to the channel now, and hit the bell. Because in the next videos, I'm going to show you how to interpret the signs your unconscious is already sending you. Leave a like because it helps this content reach other people who are living on autopilot and don't even realize it. Share this video with someone who needs to wake up and comment down below. I am ready to face the shadow. That way I'll know you're not here by accident. You're here because something inside you has already started to move.